Good morning. Looks like a friendly crowd, unlike yesterday, so that's good. If you've seen my talks the past years, you know we've been concentrating a lot on calcium nutrition on peanut. This year, I think we got a good handle on that. So this year I shifted more toward micronutrients with my research. And before I forget, I'd like to thank Georgia Peanut Commission and National Peanut Board for funding for this year, and also Waters Lab for running my tissue and soil samples. I like to use this slide, just kind of put everything in perspectives when it comes to nutrients. There are 16 essential nutrients. Some people say 18 because they add cobalt and selenium, which is more important for animal production. Also now people are recognizing nickel as an essential micronutrient. Makes me wonder why we waited this long to declare nickel, but that's another story, and we are testing nickel this year. But I like to put them in these categories also, and these are basically listed by how much plants need and how much is in the plant. They're all important, but basically, and a lot of people forget about these three, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, they're present in plants the most. Plants' dry weight matter somewhere around 40 or 50% carbon. We usually think of our fertilizer nutrients, our main ones, primary, macro, N, P, and K. Secondary, so plants need a lot of those also in a little lesser amounts, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. We usually get calcium, magnesium from dolomitic lime, sulfur. And then you got the micronutrients. And I've kind of listed them in what I kind of consider importance. And if you think specifically about a peanut and look at this, it's kind of interesting because they're legumes, so they fix nitrogen. They're good scavengers of P and K. Calcium really becomes probably one of the most important nutrients. Again, pod rot, pops, poor germination, etc. Good scavengers of magnesium and sulfur, and if you're using gypsum for calcium, you're getting some sulfur. So then you come back down to the micronutrients. Boron, we have an automatic recommendation of a ½ pound of boron on peanut. It's important for pollination and fruiting. Manganese is the one, if you're going to see a deficiency, micronutrient deficiency on peanut, it's probably going to be manganese. So we'll talk about that. And then zinc's a special case for peanut. Peanuts are actually sensitive to zinc toxicity, not deficiency, but toxicity. So we'll talk about that a little. The other ones here, micronutrients, are fairly rare, but we do have some people spraying peanuts with copper, so we're looking at that this year. We have a lot of iron in our soils. And then molybdenum. We had a suspected case of molybdenum. That's a hard word to say, by the way. It's that B and that D together. You can call it Mo if you want. But we had a suspected case of molybdenum deficiency in Brooks County this year. I'll show you some pictures. And then we don't have much problems with chlorine. So that kind of gives it in perspective. Of course, we talk about Liebig's Law of the Minimum. Again, they're all important in theory. If you haven't seen this before, if all the staves go to the top, the barrel's full, plant has everything it needs to make maximum yield. At least one thing, usually more than one, are going to limit. When it comes to nutrients, they usually put nitrogen. Theoretically, that could be a micronutrient. The other thing you got to be careful about, you say, oh, I don't think I got enough micronutrients in my plant, I'll just pour some on. I'll pour a bunch on. Unlike the other nutrients, micronutrients have what we call a narrow window of sufficiency. In other words, and this should probably be skinnier in the middle. If you're deficient on this end, you got a sufficiency range, but you put too much, all of a sudden you're in a toxic range. Boron, you can burn it. We mentioned zinc toxicity, etc. So you got to be careful in that regard. And then the other thing about micronutrients is a number of them, especially manganese and zinc, are highly tied to pH, the availability from soil, and molybdenum actually works backwards. The way you read this graph, the wider the bar, the more available the nutrient from the soil. You notice that if you raise your pH, you basically tie up manganese and zinc. And that gets to be a problem if you try to tie up zinc to avoid toxicity. Now you cause a manganese deficiency. Very common. And it makes sense when you look at that slide. And then, like I said, the higher you raise your pH, molybdenum becomes more available. Other quick micronutrient facts, they're enzyme activators in the plants. We get them from parent material, manure. By the way, chicken litter has about a ½ ton of zinc. Got that question, or a ½ pound of zinc per ton. Got that question yesterday. Doesn't have much boron in it. We can foliar feed the sulfate forms of these should be fairly mobile because they're negatively charged and they can be tied up by organic matter and pH. The other interesting thing about micronutrients is a number of them are also considered heavy metals. Normally when we say heavy metals, we think really bad, and there are some bad ones on this list. This is what the sludge people use for biosolids, etc. You got things like lead and mercury, but if you notice, you have things like copper, molybdenum, zinc, and even nickel on there as essential micronutrients. So that's something else to keep in mind. And again, nickel, it's been shown to cure mouse ear in pecans, but what does it do on peanut? That's one of the questions we had and we're starting to look at this year. Where are micronutrient deficiencies, where they have a tendency to occur? Leached, acid, sandy soils. Well, that pretty much describes all of Georgia, I think. We're just a matter of sand and sandier. So we should be susceptible. We don't have a lot of organic soils. Intensive cropping, yeah, I'll give you that. Extreme pH. We have some folks promoting very high rates of pH, taking your pH up around 8.0. Perfect situation to get into manganese deficiency. Eroded soils, and if you don't have it in your parent material. So let's just quickly look at some of the ones we're studying and looking at, and looked at in the past. Take boron first. Boron, we have an automatic recommendation, ½ pound of boron per acre. We like to see that as foliar applications and early fungicide sprays. We do not test the soil routinely for boron, so we can't just say look at your soil test. It's just an automatic recommendation for ½ pound of boron. I've looked at a lot of different products before I started doing calcium, both on peanut and cotton. It is important for pollination and fruiting. That's why you got to have it out there before the plant really starts flowering and fruiting heavy. So when a peanut starts flowering, what, maybe 30 days, you want to get it out there with those early fungicides. And deficiency can lead to hollow heart. Boron deficiency can, and that's actually one of the drivers why we started boron work again. The seed industry said there's a potential and a concern about boron deficiencies causing hollow heart, and maybe next year we can present that in the seed seminar. But I've tested a lot of products. There's a lot of things you can put in boron to make them work better, but really pound for pound, boron's boron. You can quote me on that. And what we did this year, just a simple, straightforward study to start it. We had 3 locations, irrigated locations in Georgia and 1 dry land. And then in Alabama, also working with Julie Howe from Auburn. She's got 2 dry land sites. We have untreated. We had £1 pound of boron per acre of soluble or soil applied at planting. And then we have the rest are foliars. We used a 10% liquid boron. We got a ¼ pound. We have a ½ pound in a split, so 2 ¼ pound shots. And then we have a ½ pound in a single application. We have £1 pound in split applications, ½ pound and ½ pound. And then we also have 0.025. Why do we have that one? There are some products being recommended at that rate. They won't tell you it's that rate, but do the math, and if you use like 6 ounces of a 5% boron material, that's about what you're getting. And that would work if that stuff was really good, but my research data does not prove that that's a good idea. We're looking at yield grade, boron in tissue and in the nuts, which we've never done before. That's going to be interesting, and also we're in the process right now. In fact, I see my crew back there. I don't do this by myself. I got technicians, Benji Baldry, Lindsay McDonald, and some good student help. They're shelling peanuts right now, and we're going to evaluate them for hollow heart. We're actually going to take them through to roasting and roast them, and that center of that nut will cave in on you if it's got hollow heart after roasting even more than when it's raw. All right, manganese real quick. Normally we see that where you pile lime piles on the edge of the field. Here's a picture from Lowndes County this year. This is what it can look like on the whole field. This was very late in the season though. We don't think it really hurt the grower that much. He still made about 6,000 pounds of peanut there. So there's some issues with manganese about you really need to catch it early, and does it even really hurt you late? Those are the kind of questions we're getting. Again, it's tied to pH. We have this chart. Stay above the line. Basically, the higher you raise your pH, going from down, say 6 to 7, the more you need manganese in your soil to make sure you don't have a manganese deficiency. You can look at your soil samples right now. Perfect time of year to look at them. I can look at your soil samples, work with your county agent. They can say, yeah, I think this field you're going to be susceptible to manganese deficiency. This field you should be fine. We can tell you right now just by looking at that relationship. Again, we did some we started some studies this year on manganese. Again, about the same locations. Here we're going untreated. We're using a 1/4 pound as manganese sulfate, a 1/4.5. Also in a 1/4 as chelates, because chelates are supposed to be a little more efficient. This is all foliar. We're also looking at manganese carbonate, and then we just threw our nickel and our copper treatments in with this study. And again, we're looking at yield grade manganese and copper in the tissue. I've actually seen only one time in my 22 years now, we think we had a manganese toxicity. Little known fact on waterlogged soils, manganese can convert to a more available form. The only thing that showed up in the tissue sampling here was high manganese levels in the tissue. Never seen it again. This was in 2008. So it was a real strange looking system and rusty and that kind of thing. Zinc, I'm going to go through real quick because it's more of a toxicity issue. Peanuts don't like too much zinc. I've told you this story before. Eric and Bob and I all looked at this. It turned out to be a pH problem. We had a pH of 4.9. You get all kinds of problems once you get to that level. But basically, zinc toxicity, the way to avoid it. A lot of folks get nervous when their zinc levels in their soil get around 10, but as long as you're running your pHs, again, stay above this line, it's around 6.2, you should be fine. You can even get up around 40. Keep it up to 6.5, 6.6, private plant. But what happens is sometimes people will tell me they're out around 100, and I tell them they're on their own, all right? Seriously, I'm not sure. I probably would not plant peanuts if you had 100 zinc, no matter what your pH is. So this comes into play a lot. When you're planting more peanuts, have ground, you might have this issue, so keep that in mind. There is about a 1/2 pound of zinc per ton of chicken litter. We can talk about that. And I'm running out of time, and I wanted to cover this real quick and finish with this. You talk about weird symptoms. Got called, my county agent said we got some peanut problems, and before I even got there, they suspected molybdenum deficiency. I'm not quite sure exactly how we came up with that. But if you could zoom in on that, I see all kinds of problems with this peanut. When I got out there, it looked like it had spotted wilt. You can see some leaf spot. Looks like it's got manganese deficiency. You pull them up, it's got J root. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So what do? Of course, you take soil and tissue, soil samples from a good and bad area, and tissue samples from a good and bad area. And we looked at a number of fields. And one symptom that really threw us, if you notice, because that looks like manganese deficiency, is these yellow spots. If you know what those yellow spots are, come and see me, because I still don't know what they are. I thought maybe they were some new fungus, Bob. I don't know. I thought maybe it was one of our new fungicide sprays or something was maybe leaving I don't know. But that was a common symptom in these plants. So we're not convinced still it's molybdenum. They sprayed molybdenum, didn't bring it out. Molybdenum is important for nitrogen fixation, so we put nitrogen on them, and it still did not help them. So I'm a little skeptical that was actually molybdenum, but we'll keep looking at it. And I'll finish by saying how to avoid problems. Study your soil samples now. Look for your manganese and zinc levels, pH. Grid sample and variable rate lime, since liming is so important. Apply your full recommendation of boron on a timely basis. Soil and tissue early if you suspect problems, and follow the plant analysis handbook for foliar feeding if you need to spray like manganese deficiency. And with that, I'll say thank you and see if you got any questions.